I'd like to welcome everybody to the third, shockingly still going on, LayerOne. Our first. Ted is just. All right. Ted. At the beginning of the millennia, these bunch of wild people in Seattle set up a wireless network, and 6 years later, we're going to see how it all worked out.
Cool.
All right. Ken.
All right, this thing's working, right? 10 o'clock in the morning. Oh, yeah. All right. So first off, I'd just like to say thanks to everyone here at LayerOne. Putting on these small cons is a lot of work, and you guys rock. And I think everybody should give these guys a big round of applause. They're not getting paid for this. They're doing this solely for the benefit of the community, and I think that it's a really important thing. So who the hell am I? Well, my name's Ken. I'm a member of the Shmoo Group, and I'm co-founder of the Seattle Wireless Project and also an organization called freenetworks.org, whose mission is to advocate and promote community wireless networks. So how many people have ever seen Bruce Potter speak before? Come on. What? What's this, like 2 people? Come on. Okay, well, anyways, he has this big rant, right, that he goes on at the beginning of his talk about don't believe anything I say, and so I really like that, but I'm too lazy to, like, repeat it all and copy it from him, so if you heard it before, just pretend I just said it, and here's a little picture of him to remind you. So I was putting this slide deck together, and I was trying to, I was going over some notes I had about presenting at conferences, and one of the key points they had was that your slides should have photos or pictures that provoke emotion. And so they went on further to suggest you should go to, like Getty Images or one of these like stock photography sites, but, shell out $10 for a photo that really provokes emotion. So I went to one of these sites and I did a search for community wireless networks, and I got this. It's like 2 high school girls, checking out their MySpace account or something. So then I was like, well, okay, let me dig a little bit deeper to the root of it. And so I did a search on the same site for sticking it to the man, because that's really what this is all about. And I got this. Still not quite the emotion I was going for. So then I came across this image, much better. I think this kind of, represents the message I'm trying to get across. So brief history, we started Seattle Wireless in 2000. And it was basically, a bunch of people meeting in a cafe. Wireless had just kind of become prevalent. It was starting to get cheap. And by cheap, I mean it was like $200 for a wireless card. I think maybe $600 for an access point. And we're like, well, this is a really cool, viable technology. So we kind of thought, well, what if we, in a kind of like FidoNet-esque style, put up all these wireless access points around the city instead of just like giving away free internet access, get them all to talk to each other. So we thought, that's a cool idea, and we can, go ahead and see if this works, try it out, experiment with this technology that was designed for, office and home networks, and try and kind of push it to the limits, and then share with everyone else what we did. So this is not interesting, right? A wireless hotspot, and this is kind of where we were coming from. Like, anyone can do this. Anyone can go set up a wireless hotspot, and really, at the end of the day, all you're doing is you're extending the telephone company's local loop. I mean, it's useful, right? Everybody likes free wireless, but it's not really that interesting. This is a little bit more interesting, having a bunch of nodes all interrouting among each other, all talking to each other, and essentially breaking the local loop network. So the local loop network is this thing that comes into your house, right? It's either like a pair of copper or a cable or something like that, and it's controlled by the telephone company. And so basically they dictate, whatever access you have to resources. So if we got all these people together and we got, a bunch of parties involved and could build out this network, we could essentially replace that network and kind of like, break hold of the whole like local loop monopoly. And so a lot of people didn't really get this at first. And I did a presentation at DEF CON 10, and I got a lot of questions about like free Wi-Fi, and everyone's like, well, is free Wi-Fi going to put, Comcast out of business? What's going to happen with all that? And I'm like, look, this isn't really like free Wi-Fi is not a big deal. No one cares about that. The big deal is the local loop network. And so I'm going to get more into this, but this is really kind of like the core point behind Seattle Wireless. So we went out to start doing this. We started off with like some rack mount boxes, PCI wireless cards, nothing too fancy. There wasn't really a lot of gear available out there. And so we were using static routes and RIP, and, we built some antennas like Pringles cans and stuff like that. And, it was kind of ghetto, really. And then so when we were looking at how we were going to build out this infrastructure, we looked at 802.11, and 802.11 basically has two modes that it can operate in. It can operate in access point mode or ad hoc mode. And they have more technical terms, but for the sake of conversation, those will do. Basically, in AP mode, you can have a bunch of clients connect to an access point. In order to talk to each other, all their frames get routed through that access point. In ad hoc mode, they can all talk to each other directly. So for our purposes, that was kind of more, that was more of what we were getting at. We didn't want to have things depending on one central or multiple central access points. So like in a picture like this, very dumb drawing, but in Seattle we have trees, right? And so on the left, you got a couple of guys here, and they're connected to an access point. They're happy, right? Well, then this other guy shows up behind the tree. He can't see the access point. He wants to join the party. So in ad hoc mode, he can join the party because he can talk to the other client directly, and there really is no master in the relationship. Well, it introduces a couple of problems. One being that in ad hoc mode, that's not like one big layer 2 bridge like an AP is. Each link is its own individual layer 2, so each of those nodes has to route packets, or you basically have to route packets through each of those nodes to actually make the whole thing work. Then we found out ad hoc mode sucks. So basically, vendors implement ad hoc mode, or or lack of implementation of ad hoc mode in cards. One card can talk in ad hoc mode to another card of the same vendor, but when you start trying to mix cards together, it gets kind of crazy. It doesn't really work. The Wi-Fi Alliance, which is this organization that basically certifies gear and puts the Wi-Fi logo on it to say it'll interoperate. I don't even think they test ad hoc mode because in all of our experiments, the performance has been really poor, and getting it to work has been a pain in the ass. So basically, at the end of the day, it exhibits strange, unpredictable behavior, and we're not really able to use it as much as we thought we could. So then we started looking at antennas, right? And I love the Pringles can is this is a real funny story. I gotta get into my notes here real quick. Okay, so Pringles can, 5-minute history. So we were looking at building antennas, and so we bought a commercial antenna. It was a Yagi. This is the first time we'd actually ever passed a packet more than I think this. We were sending packets up to this thing up on the hill, and it was about 4 miles, and we were all ecstatic. We were woo! We might actually be able to pull this thing off that we've been talking to the newspapers and television stations about and all that stuff. So what do? First thing we do, we take the thing apart and we try and build one just like it and see if we can cut the cost down from $200 that we paid for it to maybe $50. So while we're doing this, we're taking it apart. We're putting all the specs up on the internet. And this kid comes along, and he basically manages to stuff it into a bunch of cans. This dude, Andrew Hackman, he was about 15 years old at the time, I think, and he lived down in Oregon. And so he basically shrinks the thing down, sticks it in a Pringles can, sticks it in a Purine can, sticks it in a cashew can. And, we're like, oh, okay, well, cool. That's kind of cool. It's a clever hack. Well, little did we know, what chaos would ensue. The Pringles can becomes, the new black. And everyone starts building them, they want. And so it was interesting. We used it a lot as a tool to get people involved in wireless, because people wanted to build Pringles cans antennas. So we were like, oh yeah, we'll show you how to build Pringles cans antennas if you come and listen to us rant about the Seattle wireless thing for a while. And then they came out with a cantenna for $50. We're like, what the fuck? So 6 years later, what's changed? A lot's changed. We've gotten a little bit more mature. We're no longer running around on the roofs of Seattle with soggy Pringles cans. And we're starting to use more professional gear. We don't use, rack mount boxes anymore. We use Socrus boxes, or generally we use Socrus boxes. It's an embedded PC platform that's designed by this guy down in California, runs Linux, OpenBSD, NetBSD, FreeBSD, whatever. We also use waterproof enclosures now. We, keep stuff dry. Ad hoc mode, ad hoc mode hasn't really worked out so well. So in a lot of our links, what we're actually doing is we're using client infrastructure mode. So we're using the traditional technology that you guys are using here to connect to the access point, which means in situations where we want to have multiple links, we need to get multiple radios. Each node has to have a client node and an access point node. For routing, we're using an open source implementation of OLSR. OLSR is called the Optimized Link State Routing Protocol. It's an RFC. It's standard, and basically it's designed to it's a mesh routing protocol. So it's designed to like take a bunch of boxes. You can turn them on. They'll all connect to each other and figure out the routing all on their own. It's really cool stuff. And back in the day when we were doing static routes and RIP, part of the reason why we did that was because none of the existing routing protocols at the time, like OSPF and these types of things, were really designed. Number one, they weren't designed for wireless, but number two, they're all designed with the fact that like you have control over all the routers, and like our whole thing is that we don't want to control them all. We want everyone to control their own router. So we want to be able to have a network where someone can come up, turn on the box, connect to it. Like if all you guys fly up to Seattle tomorrow, bring your own little Socrates boxes down and turn them on, you should be able to join this thing, participate, and we shouldn't have to exchange any information with you. You should just be able to connect. So technologies like OLSR allow us to do that. There's a bunch of them out there. We chose this one in particular for one thing because it's portable. It runs on OS X. It runs on Windows. It runs on Linux, NetBSD. It's also in mesh routing. There's generally two types of protocols. There's proactive and reactive mesh routing protocols. So basically, you come up as a box on this network. You want to send packets somewhere. A route needs to be established. Well, in OLSR, it's proactively always building the routing table, which means every node is receiving routing updates at certain intervals. So when you come up and you say, hey, I want to send a packet to Joe, it's like, oh, well, I know where Joe is. Joe's over here. Whereas some of the other mesh routing protocols, like AODV is one that comes to mind. It's reactive. So when you come up onto the network, you're like, hey, I want to talk to Joe. The nodes send out like all these requests like, hey, where's Joe? Where's Joe? Where's Joe? Oh, Joe's over here. And so this tends to work better for our purposes. That's why we chose it. That looks crappy, huh? This is a network map that we generated. OLSR has a plugin that basically will take all of the topology information and create SVG images. So this was kind of a network map of our network about, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, just to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. So will it scale? Honestly, we don't know. We're pretty small right now. We've been pretty small for a while. But in Germany, there's an experimental OLSR network that has over 100 nodes, and it seems to work. And ultimately, it's hard to say whether or not it'll scale because it's still unproven technology. But the thing is that it's open technology, it's a standard, and so we kind of feel that it's our need to support it and make it better. If it doesn't scale now, well, what can we do to improve it? Like what changes need to happen to actually make that work? So what about the network? Well, right now the network is about 35 nodes, and they're not all interconnected. We have maybe like 5 interconnected nodes at the moment. We have a lot of nodes that are islands, where basically they're just nodes with internet access waiting for another node to pop up and connect to it. In some cases, we tunnel them into the backbone of internet connected of wirelessly connected nodes. But that's basically where the project stands today. And then we've also gotten a couple of high-profile nodes. Like this is a TV tower up on Capitol Hill, and a low-power FM station came to us a couple of months ago and was like, "Hey, we really like your project. We're going to give you a spot on this tower. There's just one catch. It costs about $2,000 to have somebody climb up the tower and mount your gear." So I'm like, well, and the whole time we've been running this project, we've never once asked for money from anybody, never really done like any fundraising. Everything's been out of pocket. So we're like, this is a really good opportunity. I think it might just be time to try and actually raise some money because, I put 6 years of my life into this and a lot of money into it. I don't want to go pay $2,000, to have some guy climb up the tower. So we actually set up a fundraiser, and believe it or not, like with no advertising, really just putting like a little logo on the site and, like a little logo on my weblog and a few other places. And I think 2 weeks we raised $2,000 to pay the guy to climb up this thing and mount our antenna up there. Really, really cool. Well, about a month later, we get an email from the person with the low-power FM transmitter, and they're like, yeah, guess what? The FCC won't renew our license. So we're not going to have that space anymore. It's like, oh, dude, bummer. But the flip side is that now we're actually working with another company that owns space on another tower right next to it, and we're actually going to probably end up getting, they're kind of sympathetic to the cause. They feel for us, so we're actually going to end up getting a spot on another tower much higher. So, but that's kind of like, these are like the kind of things that we're working on, the kind of stuff we're trying to do. And is it progress? Well, in 6 years, let's go back to this. So Another funny story. So we get this whole thing done, right? We get it up there, and Glenn Fleischman, this guy who's a reporter up in Seattle, writes for the Seattle Times, does like a lot of coverage on Wi-Fi, writes this article about the resurgence in community wireless networks. And so it makes it on the New York Times. There's a picture of my friend Matt standing in front of this tower, and so in the article it goes on and on about all these different community wireless groups and what they're doing. And so we get the article and we're like all stoked and we start reading it. And basically like what they wrote was like, yeah, so it's taken 6 years, but Seattle Wireless has raised $2,000 and put a node on a tower. Like, sweet. So is this progress? Well, the network has not progressed as much as we would like, but there's a lot of complications there. It's hard to get people organized. There's a lot of buildings. There's a lot of trees. Hopefully there's some stuff coming down the pike that might fix that. But ultimately, I think the impact that we've had overall has been extremely valuable. So one of the things that a couple of the people have been working on is this book called Wireless Networking in the Developing World. And basically, it's a guide for building standards-based wireless networks. You can download the book for free in PDF format, or you can buy it for the whopping price of $9.62 online. And it's basically based off of all the work that us and a lot of other community wireless network groups have done. And so this is being used in other places around the world where people don't have like existing telecommunications infrastructure, or where if they did, it would be prohibitively expensive. So like places where they get a VSAT link and they have maybe like 30 miles of area that they need to get coverage to people with. They're taking the work that we've done and they're building maintainable infrastructure. They're not getting stuff from like Cisco or Tropos that's kind of like a closed box solution. They're, number one, learning about networking. Number two, building something that's open and standards based. I think that's very important. And I mean, at the end of the day, screw the network. If we can make more stuff like that happen around the world, I'm happy. So it does work. Ghana, Belgrade, and Hungary are three places that come to mind. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, the Community Wireless Summit, and I got to meet people from all three of these networks. And like in Belgrade, they have, I think it's like a 35-node interconnected network throughout the city, and they have 400 people on it. 400 people. That's like pretty amazing. I think that's probably one of the like largest community wireless successes that I've heard of. And when he was like telling me about it, and he was like, so I go to see this guy talk, and like we've never met before, and his like first word was, first off, I'd like to say that this is not about internet access. It's about building a local network. And I like shed like a little geeky tear because I've been like trying to like get that message to people for years, and like here comes this guy out of nowhere, and we see eye to eye. It was pretty cool. Anyways, there's tons more of these projects going on, and I just think it's this is all like proof that the stuff that we've been trying to do is valuable and it is feasible. So what's the next big thing? I don't know what the next big thing is, but there's a couple of things that I see happening in the community wireless world that I think are potentially have some impact and could change things quite a bit. One is this crazy crackhead idea called OPN that a friend of mine came up with. And so basically, like you've heard the song OPP. Well, OPN is other people's networks. So I'm sure everyone in this room at some point has used the Linksys community network. Yes, whether or not you like to admit it, you have. They provide a great service. One of the most successful projects, honestly. So if you're to look at this picture, all those red circles are, like let's say they're Seattle Wireless. Well, all those blue circles are the Linksys community network. So the Linksys community network basically provides like a free layer 2 bridge, right? So if we can like overlay all of our nodes on top of the Linksys community network or whatever community, the default community network, the Netgear community network, any of them, then we can greatly expand the network, and we can make it's kind of crackhead idea. But so how does this work? Well, part of the problem is that we talked earlier about the whole AP client mode thing. One device can either be an AP or a client, and it can only be a client to one network at a time. So 802.11 has this really cool feature in it called power saving. So basically, as an 802.11 card, you can say, hey, access point, I'm going to go to sleep now and try and save some power, queue up some frames for me. So the idea is that basically all of our nodes would, be using this, and it'd be clients of the Linksys community network, and they'd be like, hey, Linksys number 1, I'm going to go to sleep now, queue up my frames. Hey, Linksys number 2, give me my frames, I'm going to go to sleep now, and just basically go back and forth and keep track of which nodes are interconnected through which Linksys community network nodes. crazy idea, but it could work because now with like Mad Wi-Fi NG, which is the new code base for the Mad Wi-Fi driver, it's a Linux driver for the Atheros wireless cards, it supports some pretty cool features. One is that a radio can act as an AP and a client at the same time. So like when you fire this thing up, you actually get virtual interfaces, and you have like, client interface, AP interface. You can do that. This might actually, OPN might work. So really, if anybody here has any interest in working on that, or if you're a software developer, and I'm looking at a couple that I see here, and you want to write something like this, let me know. We're actively looking for people to work on this. This thing right here is a card made by Ubiquity Networks, and this card it's based on Atheros, on the Atheros chipset, which is used a lot in Wi-Fi cards, but it operates in 900 megahertz spectrum. 900 megahertz can actually like go through buildings. 2.4 gigahertz sucks. It doesn't. It's just it's very dependent on line of sight. You have to be able to see the thing that you want to talk to. It doesn't go through trees or buildings very well. 900 megahertz does. So problem is the 900 megahertz spectrum is really small, and so there's some question as to like whether or not a lot of cards in the same area will be able to use 900 megahertz. But this is just kind of like there are other things coming down the pike, and hopefully we'll have some alternatives to 2.4. The FCC is talking about I've heard talks of potentially or opening up some stuff in like 700 megahertz, and so there is a possibility that we're going to be able to have some RF technology that isn't dependent on line of sight, which I think will help community wireless networks a lot. We're going to get better portals. So everybody here knows what a captive portal is, what no-cat off is. Basically you connect to a wireless network, and the first time you send out an HTTP request, it redirects you to a portal page. You either put in your credit card number or you agree to the user agreement, whatever, depending on the network, you do a variety of things. So when we first started this, the guys in Sebastopol wrote no-cap because one of the problems that we had with community networks is that we wanted to be able to tell people, hey, this network that you're connecting to is provided by people, in their spare time. It's a volunteer effort. And if you have any problems, you want to contact them, or if you want to help out, here's how you get in touch with them. Also, there's some legal concerns, so we wanted to be able to say, hey, if you do something illegal on here, you've accepted the user agreement. It's not our fault. We're not liable. So that's cool. It serves a purpose. But now there's this new thing called Wi-Fi Dog, which is it's funny, no cat Wi-Fi Dog. So Wi-Fi Dog is this new open source captive portal, and it's kind of focused a little bit differently. It's not, it does all the authentication stuff, but it's focused on aggregating information about the area that you're in and displaying it on the portal page. So here's like a little screenshot, and this is like totally all web, 2.0 shit. But basically, like Wi-Fi Dog can take information, like in Wi-Fi Dog, when you set up the access points, you can put in the geo coordinates of the AP, and so it knows where the AP is. It has like meta information about the AP. It can then aggregate information, like in Flickr, you can tag, photos with location or coordinates. RSS feeds from blogs can be tagged with, geo coordinates and that type of meta information. So when you go connect to an AP, you can get this page, and you can say, hey, like, the guy down the street took these pictures, like here's an RSS feed from all the like bloggers in the area, and you can aggregate a lot of really cool information. And I think this is going to be a really big deal for community networks because it puts more of the emphasis on community. You're not just providing an internet connection, you're providing a communications forum. Cafes are suffering from this. I don't want to say suffering, but like in Seattle we have cafes that are like shutting down their Wi-Fi at certain times of the day because people just come in there and like sit around. And I've heard cafe owners say like, this Wi-Fi thing kind of sucks. Like people just come into our cafe and they sit there. They don't talk to anybody. Like, it's kind of like an antisocial thing. So hopefully things like that will change that, and they'll help kind of like build the community around that. And it's interesting because this is all a result of like the technology getting into like the hands of like people like the bloggers and people that are kind of more into the art scene and people that are like used to communicating, unlike the geeks who, they're not really used to communicating as much in a social environment. So the tools are finally getting mature enough that people with really cool ideas can start using this, to our benefit. And this is, when we first started this, people would always be like, well, why the hell are you doing this? What's the point? And I'm like, well, there's a quote, I think it's William Gibson, it's the street finds uses for technology that the inventors never expected or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure somebody here knows it verbatim. But that was kind of my response, is that, I don't know what's going to happen to this thing, but that's why we're doing it, because I'm pretty sure that somebody's going to do something really fucking cool. And I just kind of feel like it's, I kind of feel like it's my mission to enable that. I have no idea what it is, but I know that, I know it'll happen. So then there's this whole thing called Muni Wireless. So community wireless has been going on for a long time, and a lot of people from like cities, municipalities, counties have started to saw what was going on. They're like, that's cool. So you can build your own network. Well, like in Seattle, Comcast really pissed off Seattle because they've like overpromised and underdelivered on providing internet access and cable access, and this has happened all over the country. So municipalities are, let's quote up here, when a parking ticket is not enough. So I'll get into that in a second. But basically, they're starting to build their own wireless networks to do a lot of things. One is to do stuff like support meter maids. So like meter maids walk around with wireless devices for reading parking meters, reading water meters. Police officers using it to get access to like criminal information or whatever they need. And the flip side of that is that since they're building out all this infrastructure, they can architect it in such a way that they can also provide internet access to people that live in those communities. So a lot of municipalities are going around and doing this, and this is a great thing. It's kind of what happened though. Like the municipalities couldn't really work with community wireless because we're a bunch of geeks, and it's just not, the synergy wasn't there. But they've gone off and they've done it on their own, which I think is very cool, and it's very important. And I'm going to get a little bit more later into why this is really important. But just to give you an idea of what's going on with Muni Wireless, right now there are a total of 186 active Muni Wireless projects. So that includes ones that have been deployed, ones that are in the middle of deployment in RFP. So and this is just in the past 2 years. So this is like a really serious thing. Like people are cities are pouring like millions of dollars into this. And I'm not really there's like the San Francisco Google thing. Like that's kind of like a Muni Wireless project, but these are like actual projects where they're building out network infrastructure that the city is using and the people are using as well. So here's my beef with Muni Wireless. Meet Wad, Come on, you guys are supposed to laugh. That's the whole point. It's supposed to invoke emotion. So I was at this conference a couple of weeks ago, and these guys in Corpus Christi are building out this huge Muni Wireless network. And one of the slides that the guy showed said, that the infrastructure they are using is totally secure, infinitely scalable. Well, if there's one thing that a lot of people in this room have proven is that, anything wireless is totally not secure. So Muni Wireless networks are going out and they're putting a bunch of money into these projects. And what are they buying? Well, they're not buying open standard-based equipment. They're buying proprietary equipment. So they're going out and they're buying these mesh networking solutions that speak 802.11 on the edge to all the end users, but on the back end they speak some proprietary routing algorithm. They make tweaks to the wireless side of things. And all in all, I don't really think that's a win-win situation, because on one side we have people in community wireless and people working on stuff like OLSR, and they're trying to make open, standards-based equipment that works. And then you have all these people like the municipalities who are nonprofit organizations essentially, and they want they're trying to make it work as well. And there's a synergy there that could be happening. But instead, they're going out and they're buying gear that probably won't talk to other gear, and they're buying gear from companies that may not be around in 5 years. So they're kind of they're getting locked in. And I would like to see more of the people that need the wireless networks and have the money supporting the smart people that can write the open standards-based software to support it. So it's one of those things. Do we really need to learn all these lessons over and over again? How many times have we gone through this cycle of someone comes out with a totally secure, infinitely scalable proprietary solution, find out that's it doesn't work, or in the long run it doesn't work. Whereas if it's open and if it's open standards based or open source, then people can actually extend it and fix the problems when it happens, and you're not kind of locked into this, especially in wireless, where companies kind of come and go fairly quickly. So that's my main beef with Muni Wireless. So if there's anybody here that's involved with Muni Wireless, I think it's great. I think it's awesome. It makes me happy that people are out there doing this. It's very, very important, but I just kind of wish it was being done a little bit differently. So why should you care about all this? Why should you care about community wireless networks? Why should you care about Muni Wireless networks? What's the big effing deal, right? So there's a quote here from David Eisenberg. A hobbyist collecting Pez dispensers could develop the idea to become eBay. A couple of Stanford students could start Google and build a better search engine. Two guys in Europe could assemble a handful of programmers and invent Skype and threaten the $1 trillion annual global teleconomy. So that happens. That can happen for a reason. It can happen because the internet is open and because there's all these principles that kind of fuel the internet. Well, a lot of that is threatened right now, and there's a lot of stuff that could change that. So there's this whole concept of net neutrality. Has anybody here ever heard of the term net neutrality? Yes? No? Okay. So basically the concept of net neutrality is this, that as a provider or as anyone routing bits, you treat all bits equal. All bits are the same. You don't care what they are. Basically, as long as it's not illegal and they're not hurting the network, you pass a bit back and forth. That's how most of our internet connections work. And it's part of like this common carriage thing that has existed, before the internet for railroads and for major critical paths for the economy. And so the providers must remain neutral and not filter content, not filter bits, like this stuff with like a cable company saying, hey, we're not going to pass your VoIP traffic unless you spend, an extra $10 a month. That's not network neutral. But the internet has long operated on this principle, and it's not enforced by any law or, any regulation. That's just kind of the way it's been. So what? So now in August, there's going to be a deregulation on telephone lines where, currently if you get a telephone line into your house, that your local telephone company, your incumbent LEC essentially, is required to offer access to that line so you can get a DSL connection from Speakeasy or your local ISP or whatever. Well, come in August, they don't have to do that anymore. Now, they're probably not just going to shut it off. They might start, but they're eventually going to start muscling the smaller ISPs out of the business. And the smaller ISPs are, who basically have been kind of innovating consumer internet access for the, since it's existed. The telco, who brought you dial-up first? It wasn't the telephone company. How long did it take for the telephone company to bring you dial-up? How long did, these guys are not, the smaller guys are the innovators, not the larger guys. And then in the Brand X case is this situation where a company, ISP in Santa Monica, basically was challenging the cable company because right now the cable company doesn't have to provide access to their lines for other ISPs. Speakeasy or Quest or whoever can't deliver you an internet connection on your cable connection. Only the cable company can. So that's always existed. But now in August, with the telephone lines, it's going to basically become the same thing. So what happens? Well, you basically have a duopoly on consumer internet access. So theoretically, in the next year, when you go to get an internet connection, you could have two choices. You could have the telco or the cable company. No independent ISP. Not a good situation. So what does the cable company do? Well, they've sold cable for a long time, and they want to be able to basically sell value-added services. So one of the potential threats of this is that the consumer internet access will basically become like cable television. So basic cable. Oh, you want HTTP traffic? Basic cable. You want HTTP and streaming media? Well, that's extended cable. That's $50 a month. Oh, you want premium cable, or you want to make a Skype call? Well, that's the premium cable. You have to pay $60 a month for that. Or even more so, like basic cable. Some websites. Extended cable, all websites and media. Premium cable, all websites, media, VoIP. And then, the Uber Elite cable, you get the Skinamax cable, right? So you get all your PON and all that stuff too. But is that really going to happen? Who would do that? They wouldn't do that. Well, let's look at a few things here. So AT&T's Ed Woodcare wants consumers and content providers to pay for the use of his network. The internet can't be free. For Google or Yahoo or Vonage or anybody to expect us to pay for these pipes is nuts. Okay, so hold on a second. Let me get this straight. I buy an internet connection. Google has an internet connection. We want to talk. So basically, you want to charge Google after they already bought an internet connection because you have market power over the customers. So it's like, oh yeah, well I've got all these people that are paying me, and because they're paying me, I'm going to charge you too. Like, does that make sense to anybody here? No, it doesn't make sense to me at all. I think this guy is nuts. Bell South's William Smith told reporters that he would like to turn the internet into a pay-for-performance marketplace where his company could charge for the right to have certain services load faster than others. And this is like where network neutrality kind of comes into play because they're basically talking about in this like tiered cable television style internet connection where you'll basically be forced to buy if you want a hardline internet connection into your house. They can say, oh, well, oh, your streaming media is running slow. Well, that's because you don't have, the streaming media package. You really need to upgrade to get faster streaming media. And they'll basically be rate limiting, certain bits because they want to charge you more money for it. Well, that's a good idea for me to poop on. Verizon CEO Ivan Seidenberg says that web applications need to share the cost of broadband services already paid for by the consumers. We need to pay for the pipe. Okay, so share the cost. That means so that if you charge Google money to send bits to me, then that's going to offset the cost. So you guys are going to charge me less for the internet connection, right? Probably not. So one other argument that I've heard, and this is kind of like a lot of people think of this as like the sky is falling, the internet's going to die. And then, there's the whole argument that the internet routes around censorship, right? Well, building wireless networks is a way to route around that. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of this stuff is happening. Now, also, a lot of people are like, well, screw the cable company. If they give me, as long as I have a single, port that I can send packets over, I can tunnel whatever the hell I want over it. This is true. You could do that. But at the end of the day, when you get your user agreement from your ISP, if you do that, then you basically become a cable thief, right? Now you're no different than the guy who goes into the junction box in your apartment building and wires up his own free cable just because you want to send some packets back and forth. I don't really think that that's fair. So wireless is an alternative to this. Alternative local loop networks will route around this. Like I said, this is kind of I think part of the wireless thing as a result of this, people feel a lot of frustration with the things that are happening in the telecom industry, and so that's why municipalities and groups of geeks are going out and trying to build other networks because they don't like what's happening. And in the event that you can create a ubiquitous mesh wireless network, then it's going to be a lot more competitive because then at that point any ISP can connect up to this network and provide an internet connection. Any VoIP provider can connect up and provide a dial tone. And so it's going to breed competition, it's going to breed innovation, and that's how the internet's worked. And so from the consumer standpoint, I think this is really a big threat. And for the most part it won't affect us, if you have a T1 at your house, you don't have to worry about this. But the people that are, just starting to use the internet now are not going to be open to the same innovations, and they're not going to see it the same way that we saw it. They're going to see it as a television service. They're going to see it as a one-way feed where they get information that they have to pay for, depending on the type of information they want. I don't think that that's a good thing. Competition and innovation is good. So what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is you can, educate people. I have a friend of mine who's a lobbyist, and he's trying to lobby a lot of people in Congress behind this whole network neutrality proposal where basically there would be a regulation that says as an ISP you have to be network neutral. And so he's talking to these people and he's like, well, what do you think of this whole network neutrality thing? And Congress people are like, oh, network neutrality, yeah. We don't really know what that's about, so we're just going to kind of avoid it. And they don't really understand, what's going on. I mean, you have some people that are in the pockets of the telephone companies and cable companies, and they're kind of, they're getting supported to lobby against it. And then the people that really should be able to grok it and say, hey, this is a bad thing, they don't want to touch it because, they don't understand it. And they're like, oh, it's that whole internet thing, man. That sounds like a lot of work. I don't want to, can't we talk about abortion or something? So you can write your congressperson, try and educate people on the concept of network neutrality, why it's a big deal, and why in our country it threatens internet and consumer internet access, and why that is a bad thing. The other thing you can do is you can write to the FCC. I know this sounds like a black hole, right? It's like writing to Dev Null, write to the FCC. Well, yes and no. The FCC actually, you guys are taxpayers. You pay them to do a job. They will listen to you. Whether or not they will do something is a different story, but at the end of the day, they're here to serve all of us in this room. And really, they can't make decisions for the good of the people if the people aren't telling them what they want. So as much as it sounds like a black hole, I think you should still do it. If you feel that you need to support this, I would say that you should write the FCC. And if you want to talk to somebody at the FCC, come to me. If you represent a municipality or an organization, they want to hear from organizations out there and how they feel about this and what they can do. So if you want a direct line into the FCC, come talk to me afterwards, and I can help set that up. Go to freepress.net. It's a really good website that has that has a site up there called Defend Net Freedom Now, and they have all the information on network neutrality, all the links to basically all the events that are going on, all the kind of like activist type things that you can get involved in if you want to support this, and ultimately support your community and muni networks because they're doing the right thing, they're fighting the good fight, and they need your help. All right, well, that's it. Just wanted to say thanks, and basically, if you want to contact me, you can email me at that email address, and then I'm going to post. I know I kind of like blew through a lot of information in my slide deck here, and there's like a lot of acronyms and stuff like that and links to sites. So what I'm going to do is shortly after this at my website, I'm just going to put up a blog entry with links to all the stuff I talked about. So if you want to go find out more information about stuff, you can go to that website, and that should be up there probably like within the next hour. And I'll give Noid or whoever a copy of my slide deck. And I know the slides aren't very verbose. There are a lot of pictures. So actually, what I have pretty much everything that I just said written down. So there'll be the slide deck, and then there'll also be the dialogue to go along with it. And at that point, I don't know if anyone has any questions or Bueller. Come on. Yes.
And I do have a question. In Seattle, have you guys met with any resistance from the local telecommunications companies about putting together the free wireless?
The question was, in Seattle, have we met any resistance from telecommunications companies about putting up free wireless and building out a free wireless network? The answer is, well, from the independent side, we've actually gotten a lot of support. Like a lot of the independent ISPs, I know I've said like Speakeasy 5 times. I have no ties to them, but that's just the first one that came to mind. There's a couple of other ones. I think Oz.net and Blarg. They've been really supportive of it, and they've actually come up and said, we support this. We think this is a good thing. But the larger ones, they haven't. They've come and they've talked to us to kind of try and figure out what we're going to do. But ultimately, I don't think that they see us as a threat, and maybe we're not. I'm not going to say that we're going to put them out of business because I don't necessarily think that we will. But I think that the movement as a whole and things like Muni Wireless are a good example of taking a predominantly geek movement and then turning it into something where governments are getting behind it.
That I think was the question. Really coming straight down to having the larger telecommunications companies who shall remain unnamed, actually using their lobbyists in local and state government to limit the ability to put together these types of wireless networks. Have you guys experienced that?
I haven't experienced it personally, but I know that one thing I can say is that in a lot of these situations, like in Seattle, for instance, there really is no city. There's city promoted Wi-Fi. They've been working on this. They actually started a task force, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And then in the past year, they just set up a couple of access points in Rainier Valley, and then it broke, and it didn't work for 2 months. And so they kind of it was funny. We talked to them early on. They're like, yeah, this wireless thing is great. Portland's the #1 wireless city. That's cool. We want to be better than them. And how can Wi-Fi is awesome. Let's do it. And then they set up this task force, and 2 or 3 years later, not much has happened. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not involved in politics a lot, but from what I've heard, that's kind of typical for Seattle. Whereas, these other places like Corpus Christi and, Portland, Austin, yeah, exactly, Austin Wireless and Les Networks, they've totally done, an awesome job of working with the city. And but the flip side to that, too, is that, there are, in a lot of those cities, there are lobbyists for the telcos, but at the same time, at the end of the day, when municipalities have gone to the telcos and been like, hey, that cool network you got, we'd like to use that for some public service stuff, or, we want to make our jobs more efficient, and they're like, oh, sorry, So they haven't really, while there are people there, I think that, these 186 municipal projects that you see, those are people that are tired of dealing with that crap. And so in those cases, that hasn't done any good. Maybe in Seattle, that's what's holding it up. I don't know. I don't know what's holding it up, but maybe that's one of the things that is. Yes.
So, with cable companies and stuff charging for premium services that you mentioned, what do you think, Google and Yahoo setting up their own ISPs and their networks, their own private networks to deliver their services over and over other services?
Well, why do you think they're doing that? So the question was, about cable companies trying to charge for, basically service-tiered internet access. And what about Google and companies like that setting up their own networks? Well, I mean, Google's doing it right now in San Francisco, and they have that whole, have you guys all seen that whole, like, Google trailer where they can basically, like, drop the Google bomb in a city and, like, turn on a network? Like, I think there's a reason why they're doing that. And actually, Google and Microsoft are two of the companies that are actually throwing money and resources at supporting net neutrality. They're fighting the good fight, or in my opinion, the good fight. And so yeah, I think that that's a very plausible thing, and I think that that is a possibility. But ultimately, I guess maybe 5 years from now I could shoot myself. But is Google going to take over the internet? No, they're just a search engine, right?
As far as the pricing model changing a bit with the telco saying, oh, well, Google or whoever has to pay to provide content or so forth, it seems to me they're already paying for their bandwidth and what they provide. So I'm trying to figure out how this is a little bit different.
So right now, like, for instance, if you have a cable connection at home, I don't know, what kind of internet connection do you have at home?
At home, slowest DSL I can buy.
Okay.
I work in a colo facility with 3 gig E, so...
Right, so at work you don't have to worry about it.
Most of the surfing at work.
So basically, like, and please let me know if this answers the question, because I want to try and answer your question, but like, they're currently, like, most of the pricing models are tiered in terms of speed, where like you get certain up down for a certain price, and the tiering like in those quotes that I went through, and the pricing tiering that they're talking about there is not so much tiering based off of speed, but tiering based off of service, where like there are services like, okay, so here's a perfect example, like you get an internet connection, you pay let's say you pay $30 a month for it. And you fire up BitTorrent, it's like, oh, BitTorrent doesn't work. What the hell's up with that? So you call them up, and they're like, oh, well, you want the BitTorrent plan? That's an extra $20 a month. That and so it's kind of like a services-oriented thing, or what they like to call value-added type stuff. And value added, we'll take away the value so we can add it back. Does that make sense? Is that?
I'm just looking at it like, well, Google and whoever else pays for their connection.
Oh, exactly, they do. Yeah, and that's kind of that.
They bill these clients for bandwidth. I know this.
Right. So. No, and that was kind of that was the whole. Let me go back here. So yeah, like this. That's kind of like why this whole thing is like so asinine. The internet can't be free for Google or Yahoo or Vonage. It's like, well, the internet isn't free for Vonage, right? I mean, they pay for their bandwidth. And it's not free for the customer who's using it because they pay for their bandwidth. So basically, like what they're like, oh, well, suddenly, like we're this middleman, and because we're the only alternative, we can go to the providers and say, hey, you want to talk to our customers? You have to pay us. That's basically, and so people would say, well, that's never going to happen. Well, when 90% of the people in America are forced to get their internet connection through one of two providers, they can do that. Right now, they can't because you can get your internet connection from whoever the hell you want. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. There are more hands. Yeah.
On my cable connection, I don't remember if this is Adelphi or Comcast because it's switched, but they changed the TOS and said this is for personal use only, not for business use. And if you're telecommuting and you're using a VPN, you have to pay them $99 for their premium service. Now, they never actually blocked the packets, but they implied that they would, that they might.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, what was your name? Barry. What? Barry? Barry's talking about how on his home cable connection, they basically changed the user agreement where if you're using a VPN connection to connect to your remote office, you're violating it. They don't actively block it, but it is stated that, if you do this, you're breaking the rules, and we reserve the right to terminate your connection. And so that's a perfect example of a provider that is not network neutral. And yeah, they've been talking about it. They've been talking about it for a while, and it's been slowly happening. And I think, does anyone know the whole the cable company that was blocking VoIP? Was that I don't want to badmouth anybody without knowing for sure. It was definitely them. There's a cable company that turned around and was. Cox
was doing it in South Florida for a while, but it's come back.
Okay, so Paul, right? Yeah. Paul is saying Cox was doing it in South Florida, where basically, if you want to use Vonage or these services, they're blocking like the SIP and RTSP ports, and you had to pay them an extra $10 to do it. And so the flip side of that, so one other thing too here is that so the cable company has been in the cable business for a long time, and the telco wants to get into providing TV on demand and all this stuff. So, there's a really it's people would say, well, the telephone company isn't going to do that. The cable company might because that's their business model, but the telephone company has been looking at the cable company's business model for a long time because, the telephone companies have been like, oh, well, we've got to bend over backwards to hook all these people up into our DSLAMs and give them access to our copper lines. And meanwhile, these cable companies have had it easy. They can just basically say, no. You want to use our network? No. Go away. And so they're looking at that, and they're looking at all the money they're making, and so they're starting to move towards towards the same model. Anybody else? Yes.
With the municipal Wi-Fi stuff, are you saying that when the police pull me over, I should DOS the local AP?
I'm not saying you should do anything. Don't do anything. I'm not telling you guys to do anything. But you know what? That brings up a very good point. And so the question was, if you get pulled over by a cop in a city with municipal Wi-Fi, should you just DOS their Wi-Fi connection to prevent them from being able to look up your license and give you a ticket? My response is no. Probably not a good idea. But it brings up a point which I was alluding to earlier, where if municipal wireless networks are buying proprietary solutions, then there really is no guarantee that the security is as good as these companies say it is, because there are no open test results. And for instance, a good example of this was the encryption algorithm used for GSM was a closed encryption algorithm, and they're like, don't worry, it's secure, it's got a 64-bit key. Well, come to find out that the last 10 bits were all zeros in every key. So the technology itself may, work to a degree, but then the way they implement it could be completely asinine. But you really, in those environments, you have no way of knowing that, and that's kind of a scary thing. I mean, because they're talking about running their cities off of it. And I mean, yes, wireless is not secure. We know that, but it's inevitable. People are going to use it, and the only way that we can make it better, especially in situations where cities depend on it for infrastructure or start to depend on it for infrastructure, is if they use open standards and open technologies where people in this room can figure out what's wrong with it and make it better for them. Yes.
Just wondering if you're doing anything in New Orleans, or if you have the insight into what's happening there, because we have a situation where the telcos dropped off the face of the earth. They started deploying wireless all over the city. Now that the telcos are back up and operational, they're trying to have those wireless networks shut down because they're impeding into their business.
Yes. So the question was in regards to disaster relief in New Orleans, and basically the fact that when the shit went down, the telephone companies were nowhere to be found, and people needed communications infrastructure. So as a result of that, a lot of things happened. One, a lot of community wireless people went down there to help build out infrastructure. They raised money, they got gear. Also, I think the Army Corps of Engineers was down there building out wireless networks as well with Cisco. And so a lot of these people were out there, basically saying, one thing that we've been saying for a long time, where it's this is really easy, cheap, fast deployable gear, and when the shit hits the fan, it's gonna work. And so now that that's happened, the telephone companies are trying to muscle them out. And I didn't actually know that, but according to Paul, that's happening. So I don't know what the story is with that, but I do know that a lot of the community wireless movement was down there or supporting the efforts down there. Okay, that's it. We're done. Woo! Oh, wait, one more thing. I mentioned in that book, I have 3 copies of it, so if you want one of these 3 copies, just come up and talk to me and persuade me to give you one. That's it. Bye.